A few weeks ago, I was reading some Wikipedia articles to pass the time, as you do, and I stumbled upon a story so fantastic, so surprising, and so encapsulating of everything I find interesting about history that I simply could not ignore it. This story came in the form of some horses, more specifically the horses of San Marco, and their 2,500-year-long road trip around the Mediterranean.
From Chios to Constantinople, a race that set half a city ablaze, Venetian traders, Napoleonic soldiers, and awkward teens in acid-washed jeans. It appears that nothing is certain in life except death, taxes, and horses. Because these 4 bronze statues became the perfect souvenir for countless conquerors, and the go-to trinket for aspiring emperors when it comes to decorating their new palace, arch, or church. They witnessed some of the greatest and saddest moments in human history, from the rise and fall of empires to the rise and fall of parachute pants. Today, therefore, we are going to talk about them and the people they've observed over their millennia-long history. This is Compos Mentis, and this is the tale of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or, more officially, the horses of San Marco.
Chapter 1. Ancient Origins. Now, the origins of the horses of San Marco lie centuries before the birth of their namesake, or even the city they now inhabit, with it being believed they were created between the 4th and 5th centuries BCE by the Greek bronze worker Lysippos on the island of Chios. Made from bronze, copper, and some good old mercury for flavour, it appears originally the 4 were meant to be pulling a sort of chariot known as a quadriga, and although they wouldn't keep the chariot for long, it was only a matter of time before they found themselves in a race across the world. But, for the first millennia or so, they'd stay in Chios, at least until one entrepreneurial young emperor named Theodosius II took them from their island paradise to decorate his new hippodrome in the city of Constantinople.
Well, I'm sure this won't become a trend.
Theodosius would promptly die soon after the horses were transported, with the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire seeing a period of stagnation under his successors as the West fell to some really angry Goths.
By the 6th century AD, Eastern Rome had become almost reliant on bribes to neighbouring kingdoms in order to maintain its territory, and the emperors came under increasing pressure from the residents of Constantinople. But then along came the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, who, in no small part thanks to the efforts of his wife Theodora and his military commander Belisarius, who fought back the Goths, almost managed to reunify the Roman Empire. But ironically, the horses of the Hippodrome would almost be his undoing. Not the bronze ones, mind you, just a chariot race that caused one of the most violent riots in Constantinople's history. Let me explain. It's a clear day on the field, 532 CE, and 2 of the biggest teams are gearing up for a race like no other. In the green, we've got the Procini, and in the blue, we've got the Veneti. They're both some of the most politically powerful factions in the city, with a huge and rabid fan base. Football hooligans, eat your heart out.
Emperor Justinian is currently under great scrutiny, so what better way to ensure stability than these charioteers getting together for a day at the races? It's fun and games the Roman way. How are the crowds looking today?
It appears a frenzied mob has begun chanting Nika,
And that means?
Conquer!
Someone should go warn the Emperor.
In a heartwarming display of sportsmanship, both the Blues and the Greens have put aside their differences and are now working together to assault the palace and depose Emperor Justinian. Looks like hearts aren't the only things warming up around here, because half of the city now seems to be on fire. Back to you in the studio.
If not for his wife, Theodora, the Nika riots could have seen Justinian deposed, and Rome plunged once more into civil war and chaos. Yet, due to the timely intervention of that guy Belisarius, and around 300 Roman horsemen, as well as an epic speech by the Empress, the Emperor was saved. Thus, Rome experienced the first of its resurgences after the fall of the West, with the Eternal City returning to the Empire's hands for the first time in 2 centuries.
Furthermore, following these riots, Justinian found many of Constantinople's urban areas had become suspiciously large piles of ash as of late, and quickly proceeded to renovate them into the Hagia Sophia and other similarly impressive architectural masterpieces. This period was seen as an overall revival of the Roman spirit, with military victories and cultural triumphs reminiscent of the Republic of early antiquity.
And, standing vigil over this chaos, watch now 4 horses, probably quite grateful they weren't the sort of hippodrome horse that races too much. Sadly, this would be far from the last of the bloodshed they would witness in the coming centuries.
Part 2. The Empire Strikes Back.
Now, for following the end of the Dark Ages, the Roman Empire began to experience yet another decline. A string of poor emperors, civil wars, foreign invasions, plagues, and a couple of other problems had seen the loss of Italy, Egypt, and Syria. Despite some brief resurgences under the Macedonian and Comnenian dynasties, the empire's time was clearly coming to a close. Civil war had become a fact of life, with frequent succession crises causing foreign invasions to go practically unopposed. Invasions by the Seljuks in 1065 all but doomed the empire's longevity, with the rich provinces of modern-day Turkey being torn from imperial hands, and the wealth of the eastern regions deprived from imperial coffers. Dozens of foreign powers would capitalise upon this weakness, with the empire losing the Danube frontier to Bulgaria, as well as many ports and cities to Genoa and Venice, starting a cycle of decline that would continue for centuries. By the start of the 13th century, Byzantium had become almost dependent on the West to weaken their eastern rivals, to allow for conquests, with the First Crusade being initially called to help retake the Anatolian provinces of the empire, before getting sidetracked and conquering Jerusalem.
This pattern would persist until, in 1204 AD, the city of Constantinople, the final refuge of antiquity, finally fell to a foreign invader. For the first time since the construction of the Theodosian walls, the city was conquered, and, in what seems to have become a theme, was sacked. Nika, eat your heart out. This was the Fourth Crusade, with the Eastern Roman Empire being partitioned between several powers and all its wealth and riches dispersed among them. The Byzantine Empire would never fully recover from this blow, with it briefly being ruled by Franco-Croatia, before a half-hearted restoration under the Palaiologos dynasty in the 14th century. Constantinople would finally fall to the forces of the Ottoman Empire in 1453, signifying the final destruction of the independent Roman state almost 2,000 years since its creation as a small Italian city during the early Iron Age. One of the powers that participated in the sack of Constantinople was the growing merchant republic of Venice, a port city that had used its strategic position along the Adriatic to dominate sea trade throughout the Mediterranean. This republic took the horses from the hippodrome and wanted to take them home as sweet, sweet war loot, but they proved too difficult to transport, and so it was ultimately decided to... Wait, no, what are you doing? I mean, yeah, I suppose that works too. So, these veritable headless horsemen brought the spoils of the crusade back to their island capital. It was a weight off their shoulders, at least.
Once in Venice, they'd undergo a quick recapitation and got fancy new colours to hide their damage. From then on, they would adorn the Basilica of San Marco, from which they would earn their new title, the Horses of San Marco, and they would remain for almost 5 centuries. The Republic of Venice would, in this time, become one of the major powers of Europe, participating in events like the Battle of Lepanto and the conquest of Crete. Venice would also become a symbol of the wider Renaissance, with its unconventional republican style of government becoming an example of the benefits of the separation of power. Whilst France, England and Spain all became more authoritarian, the Doge of Venice lost power to the Venetian Senate and the Council of Ten. This helped make the Republic one of the more liberal parts of Europe, in a comparative sense at least.
The Merchant Republic would experience its golden age during this time, with Mediterranean trade being lucrative and its position as the centre of European culture only being strengthened following the sack of Rome in 1527. Venice's influence would grow dramatically over this period, with its powerful navy and large trade empire being a valuable source of renown. Though Venice would never be able to rival the likes of France or the Habsburg Empire, both of which had far larger populations than the Italian state, they were able to economically dominate the Mediterranean for a period of almost 400 years. And all the while, our horses stood once more watching. They had become the symbols of Saint Mark from atop his basilica, even though he was 1,000 years their younger. As passive observers to the endless march of time, thrown around by fate and conflict, they witnessed the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. There's always another emperor just around the corner. It's just that this time, he happened to be a bit more French.
Chapter 3. The Napoleonic Problem. By the late Renaissance, Venice had waned in power, with trade between Western Europe and Asia being diverted around the Cape of Good Hope, leading to the Silk Road's declining significance. This left Venice as a weakened power, with less money to spend on a large army and navy, as well as their foreign competitors of France and Austria far exceeding them in population. Venice would maintain its increasingly untenable situation until, in 1796, it would come into conflict with a certainly not short Corsican who had a hankering for some conquest. Napoleon Bonaparte would, in the span of a year, destroy the medieval republic, dismantling its governing body and stripping the city of its artworks.
Napoleon would begin a sack of the city of San Marco, with many major symbols of Venetian power being taken down and melted, an eerie parallel to how Venice treated Constantinople in 1204. The horses would escape this purge, once again being deemed precious enough to be stolen and taken by the French to Paris. Ironically, this time they kept their heads, which is more than can be said for a lot of French people at the time. Here, they would act as a centrepiece for Napoleon's ambition to make France a beacon of European culture, crowning his Arc de Triomphe. No, not that one. As symbols of his imperial power and as symbols of the ancient empire he was trying to replicate. Here they would remain for a grand total of barely over a decade, with Napoleon's defeat at the Battle of Waterloo seeing the sculptures returned to their adopted city of Venice. But by then, it was under the control of the Emperor of Austria, who was so chuffed with the horses of St. Mark that he gifted the captain that retrieved them a golden snuff box with his initials spelled out in diamonds. Unbelievable. Following a brief but unsuccessful attempt to gain independence from Austria as the short-lived Republic of San Marco, Venice would eventually be conquered by the Kingdom of Italy during the wars of German and Italian unification, and the four horses residing in a now unified Italy, very different from the Roman peninsula they had once known.
Chapter 4. Conclusions. Though we may not have described in too much depth the history of the horses themselves, we aimed through this video to describe the world they inhabited in the way they would have observed it. In our opinion, the true beauty of the four horses comes in the form of what they have witnessed more so than what they actually are. Though they are individually spectacular examples of Greek bronze artwork, their story is that which far exceeds such beauty purely in the unlikeliness of it all. These horses have been present for some of the most critical moments of Southern European history. They have become symbols of the human spirit of perseverance and constant reminders of the continuity of humankind.
Truthfully, the horses no longer watch over the piazzas of Venice. In the 1980s, their millennia-long shift came to an end, and they were removed from the Basilica of San Marco due to damage from air pollution. But 4 new horses were created, perfect replicas of their forebearers, and they have been standing vigil ever since, whilst the originals are preserved for even longer, safe indoors. But in their time, they had seen the rise and fall of empires, the Crusades to Constantinople, the collapse of the Roman Empire, Venice's burgeoning republics, and the conquests of Napoleon, outliving kings, republics, and empires long fallen. They survived plagues and wars, their own decapitations, and even the 80s. To that extent, these 4 ancient horses act as a precious link between us, the revolutionaries of France, the medieval merchants of Venice, the old glory of Constantinople, and their ancient, almost mythical creators on Chios. Empires break and bend, but art and horses are eternal.
We have been Compos Mentis. This has been our perhaps slightly pretentious take on the horses of San Marco. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
I'm gonna take these horses to San Marco. We're gonna ride them from the Hippodrome to Paris, all the way from Chios. Maybe don't mention that to Lysippos. I've got the horses in the back, their head's been reattached. Thought they had a chariot, but we're getting off track. From Venice they're acquired, Napoleon will fight them. Someone shout Nika, why's everything on fire?